The honourable member for Scarborough-Rouge River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again today to voice my opposition to Bill C-51 in its current form. Each one of us knows terrorism is a real threat, and we are all committed to keeping Canadians safe. However, Bill C-51 remains a reckless, dangerously vague, and likely ineffective piece of proposed legislation. It doesn't do things that are proven to work and puts politics ahead of protecting Canadians. The members of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security heard testimony from a range of experts. Many of these experts raised concerns, serious concerns, about provisions in Bill C-51. The government also received amendments from the official opposition, New Democrats, and other parties. The government rejected the substance of these amendments. The government did make 4 amendments to the bill, though. Unfortunately, these amendments do little to address the major concerns Canadians and experts have consistently raised about this bill. Therefore, I stand proudly with my New Democrat colleagues as we continue to stand for privacy, national security oversight, and our civil liberties, while working to make our country safe from terrorism by advocating on evidence-based approaches to anti-terror legislation. In regard to privacy, 12 Canadian privacy commissioners have publicly criticized Bill C-51, but not one privacy commissioner was invited to appear before the Standing Committee on Public Safety. These are the public authorities on privacy and should have been heard. In a written submission to the Committee on Public Safety, Daniel Therian, the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, wrote, and I quote, "The scale of information sharing being proposed by C-51 is unprecedented. The scope of the new powers conferred by the Act is excessive, particularly as these powers affect ordinary Canadians, and the safeguards protecting against unreasonable loss of privacy are seriously deficient. While the potential to know virtually everything about everyone may well identify some new threats, the loss of privacy is clearly excessive. All Canadians will be caught in this web." End quote. Under the proposed legislation, law-abiding citizens could find their information shared by federal departments and agencies with intelligence and law enforcement agencies. Furthermore, the Privacy Commissioner states that Bill C-51 does not prescribe clear and reasonable standards for the sharing, collection, use, and retention of personal information. Canadians have a legitimate right to privacy. How can this government be so reckless with the personal information of Canadians, Mr. Speaker? How can they allow the sharing of information without proper oversight and clear standards regarding the necessity for the sharing of this information? Furthermore, experts like Craig Forsese have pointed out that Bill C-51 also erodes the individual's right to legal recourse. Under Bill C-51, as long as the Canadian government officials share information in good faith, if people are tortured or their livelihoods lost, these individuals cannot sue the Canadian government. We were shocked and saddened by the case of Maher Arar, a Canadian citizen who was tortured in Syria because of the information that was shared about him. Maher Arar was able to use legal recourse to get an apology and compensation from the government. If Bill C-51 becomes law, if anything like what happened to him, to Maher Arar, happens in the future, there will be no legal recourse for Canadians. As a nation, we should be making sure that what happened to Maher Arar never happens again to another Canadian. We need to do that by making sure there is oversight, that the rights of our citizens are protected. We should not be allowing information to be shared with the little oversight and then stripping away the ways in which Canadians can hold their government accountable. As I've stated in prior remarks, Mr. Speaker, I am also concerned about the potential impacts of Bill C-51 on Canadians' freedom of speech and the right to protest. One of the 4 amendments that the government members accepted in the committee stage changed the language to say that activity that undermines the security of Canada does not include advocacy, protest, dissent, or artistic expression. However, any act that blocks infrastructure could be subject to disruption and covered as part of this anti-terror legislation. In 2009, before I became a Member of Parliament, Many members of the Tamil community and other human rights activists were out on the streets trying to raise awareness about the innocent people being killed in Sri Lanka. Each day in Ottawa, in Toronto, and in cities across the country, people were engaging in lawful protests asking for the Canadian government to listen and to take action. On May 10, 2009, some of the protesters blockaded the Gardiner Expressway in Toronto. According to our experts, under Bill C-51, the blockade of the Gardiner Expressway could have been considered an activity that undermines the security of Canada, classified as blocking infrastructure, and covered under this anti-terror legislation. So on May 10, 2009, people blockaded the Gardiner Expressway to bring attention to people being displaced and killed senselessly in Sri Lanka. Should these people, that's seniors, children, and families who blockaded the Gardiner, be called terrorists and be subject to additional surveillance, Mr. Speaker? Is that fair? In January of 2013, 6 youth and a guide left on snowshoes and on a walk to Ottawa in support of the Idle No More movement. They called their trek the Journey of the Nish, which means the journey of the people in Cree. In the final hours of the trek, the group numbered nearly 400 people as other children and youth from Cree and Algonquin communities joined them along the way. I remember being one of the thousands more who joined them here at Parliament Hill as their journey came to an end. As people joined the trek, perhaps streets were blocked and traffic snarled. Should these youth be called terrorists and subject to additional surveillance, Mr. Speaker? We must make sure that the voices of people can be heard. We must make sure that dissent and protests are protected in our country. We must allow for the freedom of speech to remain a charter-protected right in our country. We cannot allow nonviolent acts to be called terrorism because they are not terrorism. They are nonviolent acts that can help build our civic infrastructure and can result in positive changes in policy. Mr. Speaker, this omnibus bill is 62 pages long and its scope is unprecedented. I could continue to talk about the many ways in which the bill threatens the civil liberties we hold dear for a lot longer, Mr. Speaker, but I think the point has been made and I'm sure, running out of time. This bill remains reckless, vague, and likely ineffective. So what are some proven approaches to combat terrorism that are more likely to be effective? I'll name a few from what the experts have cited. First, providing appropriate resources for security and intelligence agencies to track and identify threats to public security. Former Ottawa Police Chief and current Senator Vern White said, and I quote, "My biggest concern right now is, do we have the resources to focus energy on radicalized people out there that are concerning us? I'm not convinced that we have those resources," end quote. RCMP Commissioner Bob Paulson testified before the Senate that he has reallocated resources, including hundreds of personnel from areas such as organized crime, to counter terrorism. Why would the police not have adequate resources to fight terror, Mr. Speaker? Organized crime also presents a public safety threat to Canada, so why is the RCMP being forced to make these reallocations? We know that between 2009 and 2014, annual RCMP spending decreased by $420 million, and between 2012 and 2014, 2,271 full-time equivalent positions were cut from the RCMP. In 2012-13, CISA spending was cut by $44 million. Another proven approach to combat terrorism that is more likely to be effective, Mr. Speaker, is oversight. Oversight over the past 5 years, oversight mechanisms that are meant to hold the security and intelligence agencies accountable have faced cuts and positions have been left vacant. Now, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-51 would further expand surveillance and the capacity to detain people, but does not expand oversight. Oversight could mean more diligence on the part of the security agents themselves, knowing that oversight bodies are in place. A third measure is counter-radicalization programs, Mr. Speaker, working with at-risk communities and connecting with community and faith leaders to provide resources to diffuse radicalization in integral parts of our communities is an integral part to proven anti-terror programs. Mr. Speaker, I know I'm running out of time, so I just want to say that today I stand proud to be standing with my New Democrat colleagues as we take our responsibility to stand up for Canada seriously. We are disappointed, though, Mr. Speaker, that the third-party Liberals seem to believe that supporting this bill and giving the Conservatives a blank check is the best way to protect Canadians' freedoms. I am proud that the New Democrats are taking a principled stance and not supporting Bill C-51. And, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to defend both our rights and our freedoms in this country.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for York South Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague from Scarborough-Rouge River for her excellent speech, in which she points out that activities that have been taken by Canadians of the Tamil origin have in fact been successful in changing Canadian attitudes towards a certain government that was perhaps not as kind to its citizens as it ought to have been. And those Canadian attitudes having been changed has changed world attitudes. And it started in part with a protest that blocked a part of a major artery through the city of Toronto. And this government now would make that kind of protest illegal and thereby prevent such an amazing display by an amazing bunch of young and determined individuals in the city of Toronto. And I wonder if you'd like to comment further.
The honourable member for Scarborough-Rouge River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague from York South Weston for his question and also for his passion and his sincerity in knowing what happened to the Tamil people. I remember as hundreds of thousands of, it was a youth-led legal protest that happened all across the country, and specifically in Toronto, where it was young people, seniors and children, human rights activists from all parts of the world, and Tamils living in Toronto, who were on the streets for 2 weeks, Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks every day, and it felt like their cries for help, their cries for support, their cries for this government to do something fell on deaf ears, that out of pure frustration, the people decided to walk up the Gardiner Expressway and blockade the Gardiner and got attention. Finally got the people to listen and the government to listen. And that activity will now be classified as an act of terror. And we would see hundreds of thousands of children and seniors and families being classified as terrorists in this country, and that just doesn't make any sense, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Melp. The honourable parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Heritage. No. Oh, sorry. The honourable member.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Speaker. I just wanted to note that the accusation level in the speech is actually completely false and untrue. Not only did the bill in and of itself not put someone who is doing a legal and lawful protest in a position to continue to do that, we actually clarified through amendment the bill in and of itself that gave greater clarity to that exact expression in terms of the ability to protest in a lawful and a peaceful way. For the member to use an example of a protest and somehow try to twist that into something it is not is unfair, and it's actually wrong, and shouldn't be brought up in the House in a way that speaks to it, speaks to something that is false as if it is true. And just because you say it again and again and again doesn't actually make it true. So I would like to get the acknowledgement from the member that the protest that she's indicated, whether or not she's actually checked the legal definition, and whether she's actually sought to ensure, whether she's been at committee subbing in or asking the very question or making the very comment that she is very clear in the legislation. It is even brought more clarity by the fact that an amendment was brought forward to deal with this specific issue. I know the leader of the Green Party accepts the clarification. I would hope that the member would as well.
The honourable member for Scarborough-Rouge River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Parliamentary Secretary for giving me this opportunity to remind him, through his own words, that just repeating falsehoods doesn't make it true. So every member of the Conservative Party and this government should learn from the words of this Parliamentary Secretary that repeating falsehoods never makes them true. However, I will give you, Mr. Speaker, the expert opinion, because of course we like to consider the opinions of lawyers and people who know the law better than all of us, most of us probably in this place. And yes, the Parliamentary Secretary was correct in the sense that the government members only accepted 4 amendments, and these were amendments that came from themselves. And the only change that happened with this one piece that he speaks of is the change from the words legal protest to protest. However, the piece that remained that I mentioned in my speech, maybe he missed it, is that any acts that blocks infrastructure could be subject to disruption and covered as part of this anti-terror legislation. That is truth. That is not a falsehood. And that has been clarified by many experts. And that is what I speak of, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.